You see this picture here of this little Eden boat floating on the midst of the chaotic sea, and then God's Spirit coming over the waters, and then the deep waters, the chaotic waters residing when the Spirit does that. But speaking of chapter 6, we'll actually get there next. But we talked about how the list in chapter 5 ends with Noah. And so again, Noah's 500 years old, and that's when he fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And so what you'll see is something interesting. So chapter 5, that's how chapter 5 ends. And then verse 9 of chapter 6 picks up and says, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God, and then he had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And it's like, okay, why did you just repeat what you told me literally 8 verses ago or 9 verses ago? Well, there's this lovely 8-verse passage in here about the sons of God seeing beautiful women on earth, taking them, having offspring with them. This is where you get the giants, the Nephilim, that story. And then this is where God sees the wickedness of man. Or the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and where God declares, I will blot out man, and meaning man and animal, and he goes on to say man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. So God's basically going to wipe everything out because of the wickedness of man. And then I do want to point out right here, when we talk about the sons of God, we're not going down the sons of God spiel tonight. We've done that in the Divine Counsel course. This is more focused on the flood tonight. But the sons of God see beautiful women, and then they take them. So they see something that's appealing, and then they take. That's directed back towards the garden where the woman sees something that looks good, the fruit of the tree, and she takes it for herself. Cain does the exact same thing where he sees and he takes. He fails the test at the tree. And so again, people being that image of a tree. So the sons of God, now there's a divine failure. At first it was a human failure. Now it's turned into a divine failure, and the consequence for this is God's like, I'm blotting them out. I am blotting them out. However, verse 8 says, but Noah found favor in the eyes of Yahweh. And the reason I have Noah and favor highlighted is because they're a word play on each other. So Noah is one of those fun words in Hebrew where you get to make a hacking sound, but the word Noah is Noach, and the word for favor is chen. And if you look at it, Noah is chen spelled backwards. Like they're literally just, you flip the letters around. And so there's this word play of Noah finding favor in the eyes of the Lord. And then Noah obviously means rest, which we'll get into. And so, these 8 verses right here have sent many people down wild rabbit chases of who are the Nephilim, kind of the Indiana Jones here. Let's go digging for giant skeletons across the globe. And we're not getting into that tonight again. This really, I heard this from, can't remember who I heard it from originally, but a scholar I heard this from was basically that those 8 verses right there are a timestamp. They're a timestamp in the story, very similar to how if you and I were just to be in casual conversation and make a 2-sentence reference to the Redcoats, we would know that we're talking about the Revolutionary War. It's something commonly known in our time period, and the same thing is going on right there. And basically what it boils down to is that what the Bible is getting at is that Babylon's boasting is actually the spread of corruption throughout humankind. So where Babylon thought that kind of these giants and people were basically good people, they're like, hey, we're descendants of them, they're great. The Bible's just like, actually, no, it's not. It's like a rebellion against the one true God. And so just have that in there to show you that this is really more of a timestamp of kind of, hey, we're letting you know what part of the story we're talking about right here. But it would have been common knowledge back in that day. On to the flood account, really, Genesis 6 through 8. Here's the grand summary, and we looked at this a little bit when we were talking about garden imagery, I believe in week 2, but here's the summary of it. God chose a royal priest, again, that's Noah, whose name is Rest, to build an ark and rescue all the animals he created in them. The ark becomes this floating Garden of Eden because of what he takes on the ark with him. He takes livestock, he takes animals, everything that you would have found in the Garden of Eden. And again, Noah's name meaning rest, he's placed in charge of this floating garden that floats upon the chaotic waters of the deep that burst forth to create, or that God brings forth for this flood. And then the ark comes to rest on a mountain, and then God restores the Edenic covenant. And so we talked about the mountain. Eden is described actually as a mountain in the book of Ezekiel. So you got this garden comes to rest on a mountain, correlating to the garden and the mountain of God. And then again, God restores the Edenic covenant, very much what he did with Adam and Eve. He didn't restore it, he started it with them. Start over and with the royal priesthood. So that's the summary of it. Now, where a lot of discussion with flood has gone recently, I would say in recent times, I guess. And I'm not saying these things are necessarily bad. I'm just trying to get maybe more so what stories trying to be is what the original audience have been thinking about. We talk a lot, and you may have seen in the news, like, hey, did we actually find the ark or the remains of the ark? This is a picture from where some believe they found remnant of the ark in Turkey, I believe. But we're trying to go, hey, where is it? Where is it? And then also, what all animals were on the ark? Were there dinosaurs on the ark? Were there penguins on the ark? Any kind of variation of animals that you have. And so that's where the discussion, at least that I've seen, has tended to revolve around. But again, going back to this point of the organization of the narrative in the story, rather than just simply putting modern questions that I have into the text. Kind of talked about that a little bit last week with that 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17, that all scriptures God breathed for equipping us to walk godly lives, not necessarily to answer every question. But just something to keep in mind as we're going forward, because what we're going to do is look at the literary style of the flood. And it's truly remarkable. This onion in and of itself goes so deep. We're just going to barely scratch the surface of it tonight. But Genesis 6 through 8 is written in chiastic structure. Again, that's this narrative where you have this A, B, C, D. D would be the hinge point here, and then it reverses back on itself in C, B, A order. And so you basically have this build-up, hinge point, which is the central theme of the story, and then it falls back on itself. And that's so that you know where the hinge point of the story is. That's designed to be, it's a literary style designed to show you the important part of the story. And then, my word, there it is. What we'll see is that the flood story, it actually harkens back to Genesis 1, and it's an invitation to follow a single family. Again, that line, that righteous line from Adam to Noah. So again, have this up here just to show that, again, Noah being righteous, because Noah, just like Enoch that we looked at with in that Genesis 5, this is where they're correlated. Enoch walked with God, Noah walked with God. That same Hebrew word is used for both of those instances. Let's get into the chiasm, because I love it. All right, the chiasm of the flood, there are 14 separate scenes, and it's actually 2 combined macro chiasms. So you got chiasm 1, chiasm 2 that actually make up this one giant macro structure. The whole story becomes essentially, because of the double chiasm, becomes a 2x2. Which is very likely intentional given the 2x2. You just take the animals 2x2 on the ark. So there's so much play in this. I love it. But the scenes, they're marked out by really, not exclusively, but these are the big markers to how the scenes are divided out in the chiasm. It will be a reference to Noah and his sons, or there will be some type of statement of time. We will see the number 40. So glad you mentioned that earlier. We're not going through all this. This is just to show you what the macro structure of it would look like. There's genealogies, again, from chapter 5 that go into actually chapter 10 that surround this giant chiasm that ultimately meet in the middle. And the middle point is absolutely fascinating that we'll get to. This, again, is just, I zoomed it in. I just took the genealogies out, but this you can actually see the build up here, 1 to 7, and then 7 back down through. And so I'll go over a couple of these. I'm not going to go through the exhaustive list, but there's chiasms within the chiasms. Like, it is truly remarkable. You'll have some verses that have chiasms within like a 2 or 3 verse cycle, and then interwoven with that is another chiasm that involves 2 more. It goes so deep. It goes so deep. But here's a good starting point in terms of recognizing chiastic structure within the Bible, and also specifically here, the flood narrative. This is where 40 comes in. You get this period of, there's 2 days of 7 days of waiting. And then that is followed by 40 days of the flood. There's that 40 number. Then for 150 days, the waters prevail. And here's the central hinge point in the middle. God remembers Noah. He remembered Noah and the promise that he made with him. Once Noah is remembered, you get 150 days where water, instead of prevailing, now the waters are going down. And then you have another 40-day cycle where it's the end of the flood, and then that's followed by 2 days of waiting for the waters to fully subside. And so you can see this 7-7 on both ends, the 40s and then the 150s, and then that central hinge point. Again, this is designed to tell you that, hey, the important part of this story is that God remembers Noah. Here's one other one. And this is a little bit smaller, but again, God remembering Noah is the central point of this. It's where the waters increase, in contrast with the waters going down, the mountains are covered, then the mountaintops become visible, and then God remembers Noah again. So these are just, again, there's many more chiasms in there than this, but this, I hope this is helpful, and if you go back and you read the story, you're reading somewhere in the Bible and you start seeing patterns of days or numbers or even words pop up, that there's likely some type of chiastic structure or linear sequence going on to try and point you to the main theme of the passage that you're reading. So I think it's fascinating that it's written this way. And this is where my opinion comes in real quick, but it shows me that, yes, this text truly is inspired. It's one of the things that gives confirmation to me about the text being the inspired word of God. Like, only He's going to organize it and inspire that organization in the way that it was written. So I think it's very, very special. But this is where the disclaimer comes in from Jeremy right here. We're going to loop back into God favoring Noah in a minute, but I did just want to cover this because it has been somewhat of a hot topic, I think, in the past. But just here's the disclaimer again. Then we're going to talk about the global. Was the flood global? Was it regional? Again, I'm not here to say it's one or the other. I'm here to offer both viewpoints. Again, the viewpoint, as Jeremy said earlier, First Christian stands that it's a global flood. Yeah, but I'm offering both views. I'm not saying one is correct or one is not. Just here are both views. You have the view, we'll start out with the global flood. This is really where it comes from. I mean, it comes from several places within, but you get, this is chapter 7. I don't have that in here, but verses 19 through 22, you'll see phrases like the earth and the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered, and that all flesh died on the earth. And then you get 2 more instances of all swarming creatures and all humankind. And then we talked about the word. This is where the discussion starts right here, global or regional. Again, this is just me sharing information. But that word earth is the same Hebrew word that we looked at in the Genesis 1 part that means land. The word eretz means land. That word translated all and whole right here are actually the same word in Hebrew. So don't you wish they would translate it the same sometimes? But yeah, it's the same word. It's the Hebrew word kol, which just means all or every, or in this case, whole. And then, so where this comes into play is, again, where the discussion starts is, how do we think of the earth? What did they mean by the word eretz? Did they mean globe? Did they mean land? What do they mean by all of what? Is it exhaustive totality? Is it not? And where some people have pointed, again, this is kind of sharing like the points that would seem, this is points for the regional right here, where people have drawn, it can't mean exhaustive totality all the time. This is where Abram and Lot are speaking together. And they eventually say, Abram says, is not the whole land before you? When he's talking like, hey, Lot, we're looking out at this land like to the left and to the right. And it's that same pairing of words, is not the kol eretz before you. And so he wouldn't be talking about the whole earth in this instance. You can't see the whole earth from any mountain that you stand on, but it's just a selection more so of land. There's also 2 Samuel that says, the battle spread over the face of all the country, and the forest, and devoured more people that day than the sword. Country in this instance is the same word eretz as land. I'm not sure why it's translated country in the ESV, but it is. But it's the same Hebrew word, and then you get that all is the word kol right there. So this would not be speaking that the battle spread over the entire globe, if you will. And so this is just things that people are pointing out, that the word all and the word land doesn't mean exhaustive totality or the entire earth at one time. And then here's the big one that people will point to. This is from Genesis 9, chapter 19, or Genesis chapter 9, verse 19. It says, these 3 sons of Noah, these 3 were the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And from these, the people of the whole earth were dispersed. Again, there's that pattern of kol eretz, were dispersed. And so you get that, and I've used this before in presentations too, but this is the representation of Shem, Ham, and Japheth and their descendants. This is the 70 nations, which, again, has been talked about here previously. We'll also cover it because we come to it in Genesis chapter 10 and chapter 11. But this right here would be all 70 nations right here represented. And what's said about this is more so that, hey, this is not the entire earth, this is the entire known world at the time of the biblical authors when this story was written. And so that's the discussion around, was it local, was it global, in a nutshell, where you get people from both sides saying it's global because of some modern current things that we know and understand or that we need to explain, or it's regional because you can't have exhaustive totality, and the discussion will go on and on and on and on. But what I want to look at now is harken back, is what is the point of the flood story? So a little bit of a rabbit trail on the global and regional, but again, want to just, in case you hear it, being prepared to give a defense for the hope that is within us. If we hear these things, I think it's valuable that we hear every side to an argument, whether we agree or disagree. But that being said, I'm going to ask the question, what is the point of the flood story? And people have argued just based on the style that it's written in, again, God remembering Noah at that kind of central hinge point of it. The flood account is actually a decreation story. And again, there's my favorite word online too that I'm not going to say for the third time. But it's a decreation story. And this really, chapter 6 of Genesis is where you start getting words and terminology from the first 5 chapters that start getting repeated. And so those themes that you're being taught in the first 5 chapters end up playing back here. And the flood is also, it's a story written to set the record straight about, again, there was a known flood account throughout the whole ancient Near East at that time. Every culture essentially had a flood account. And so it's a way of describing, hey, we get that you think so-and-so caused it, but it is actually Yahweh that caused it for specific reasons. I want to go back to that central hinge point of Noah, of remembering Noah. We covered this in week 2. When we covered the first 3 verses of Genesis 1, which we covered 3 verses in the first week, and tonight we're covering 4.5 chapters. Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, it says, now the earth, same word eretz right there, now the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So we looked again, that Spirit being the Hebrew word ruach, which can mean breath, wind, or spirit, and the waters are the waters of the deep right there. That's why they're both in blue. And that God is in control. He's hovering over right here. He's hovering over these chaotic waters in the creation narrative of Genesis 1. And then when we look at Genesis chapter 8, verse 1, this is what we get. And God remembered Noah. Again, there's that central theme. God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. And God made a ruach. God made a wind blow over the earth, and the water subsided. So here you see the Spirit, that same words, ruach, for breath, wind, or spirit. God made a ruach blow over the earth, and the water subsided. So in Genesis, you get Genesis 1, or Genesis in both instances. Genesis 1, you get God's Spirit hovering over the waters. Here again, there's that ruach hovering or coming over the waters. And then the fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were closed because of this. So where the deep, or God in Genesis 1 created in the midst of that deep and chaotic waters just because he was in full control, here the fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were closed, and the rain from the heavens was restrained. And so this word deep, again, right here, it's the same Hebrew word from Genesis 1, the word tahom, which is that dark, chaotic ocean. So you see this picture here of this little Eden boat floating on the midst of the chaotic sea, and then God's Spirit coming over the waters, and then the deep waters, the chaotic waters residing when the Spirit does that. And then we covered this, just again, this was one of the pictures and one of the interpretations that we looked at, that expanse. What is the expanse? What is being described here? Is it modern cosmology? Is it ancient cosmology? But this is where I'm just have this up here because I don't know if you can see these little slashes through this right here. There's reference throughout the scriptures as well, but the windows of heaven language would be the waters that were above and then the waters from the deep below. The windows of heaven were closed so that the waters above could not come through anymore, and the waters of the deep subsided. So you have this, hey, I'm going to turn the faucet off up here, if you will, for an analogy, and then I'm going to drain down here. And so you're not getting water from anywhere up there. Going on in the next 2 verses, in chapter 8, you have, and the waters receded from the earth continually. At the end of 150 days, the waters had abated. Now, there's that 150 again that you see play in that theme. Again, 150 and 150 are the last 2 chiasms before you get to that central hinge point, or the last 2 chiastic narratives before you get there. This is really cool. This is actually, I think, my favorite correlation that I learned. But it says in verse 4 that, and in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. And so, why the 7th month and why the 17th day? Again, is it literal? Yeah, sure, it could be literal, but is there something more going on at play here, or are they interwoven together? You can make the decision there for how you want to interpret, obviously, but I think there's something to the 7th month and the 17th day that people have pointed out. So we'll talk about the 7th month first. Again, this being a correlation to Genesis chapter 1 and that creation narrative, we looked at kind of day 2 gets repeated and day 3 gets repeated in that sense of the waters and the deep, which we'll get into a little bit more here in a minute. But the 7th month, 17th day, Day 7 of the creation narrative of Genesis 1 is when God rests from all that he had done. So the ark actually comes to rest in the 7th month. So you get this correlation between the resting on the 7th. So the month and the day. Day from Genesis 1 and then month from Genesis 8. Again, because God rested from all he had done. And then the occurrence of 7 that we looked at from Genesis chapter 1, God speaks 10 times. in Genesis chapter 1 in that creation narrative. So 7 are divine commands and 3 are divine initiatives, but he speaks a total of 10 times. And so 7 plus 3 is 10, but then you get that theme play on 7 too. So there's this idea that, hey, 10 plus 7 is 17, so the 17th day is looping you back into these divine commands plus a cycle of completeness on the number 7. So it's another one of these numerical kind of patterns that might be at play here that, we in our modern mind, I'm speaking for myself here, I don't think anything. When I think the 7th month of the 17th day, I'm like, okay, cool. Thanks for letting me know the day he got there. But there might be something more going on. It might be that, yes, but there might be another layer to that onion as well. And then the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Again, the ark rests. So this Eden, this floating Eden rests on the mountains. This is Ezekiel 28, verse 13. It says, you were in Eden, the garden of God. And then later in verse 18, it says, I placed you. You were on the holy mountain of God. So Eden it's a garden, but it's also a holy mountain, kind of this garden, holy mountain. And so you have this floating garden resting on the mountain. So to me, it blows my mind. I'm like, okay, someone's behind this and they're not human. But that's just my take on it. But we'll also talk about the length of the flood. The flood starts in the 600th year of Noah's life in the second month on the 17th day. And there's that 17th again. And then the flood ends on the 601st year in the second month again on the 27th day. Now, Jeremy, I meant to ask you, but you had a book that talked about the second month that you shared when we were actually here for the new moon celebration in the second month. But there was something I meant to ask you on that, maybe share afterwards, just kind of what that, because I think there's some correlation there as well, thinking about this. But it made me scratch my head when I was reading this, like the 27th day, like why can't it just be the 17th? Why can't we do like one full, like what's going on here? Why is there a separation of 10? I ended up talking to Alan about this because Alan, you actually approached me about it, and Alan made a fantastic point that when we look at, we've talked about the fall feast days in here before, about how Day of Trumpets was thought to be correlating back to the original day of creation and tradition, like it's that day of creation. 10 days later, you have the Day of Atonement. And so there's this link between a full year plus 10 days. You would have creation to creation plus 10 days being the Day of Atonement. And then that linking into, you talked about in the New Testament where it talks about how the days of Noah, it will be like the days of Noah coming back. So really interesting correlation. Thank you for sharing that, by the way, Alan. Want to give you the shout out there. But my moment of head scratching, like, why can't it just be even? Turns into be, hey, this is likely a play on God's appointed times, which would again go back to Genesis 1, where he places the stars in the sky for that purpose. So a couple more correlations here for when they actually get off the ark. Remember, God restores the Edenic covenant with Noah and his family, and he tells them to be fruitful and multiply. And this is when God actually says, the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, all the animals. That's why I have the lemur here with that scared-looking face there. But so there's this divine command again. There's this Edenic covenant being restored to be fruitful and multiply. And when we look at this, we go back to Genesis 1, be fruitful and multiply. God tells the fish and the birds. So when the waters were separated, waters above, waters below, the fish that live in the waters above, and then the birds that are up in the air above, that they are the ones that are told to be fruitful and multiply in Genesis 1, and the humans are told to do so also. We get to Genesis 6, really I guess Genesis 8, because that's when or Genesis 8, 9, because that's when the flood has gone down. When they get off the ark, the same command of be fruitful and multiply is given, again, to Noah and his family, the humans, but instead of the fish and the birds this time, it's given to the animals from the ark. And but just going back into the correlation between this, the fish and the birds, they can fly. They can still fly. They're not, when the flood comes, or they can be on the ark, they can be resting on it there. And then the fish, obviously, if there's a bunch of water, they can be swimming around. I don't think the Bible says anything about Noah bringing a giant aquarium on the ark with him because the fish are swimming down there below. But you have this instance where the animals now need to get off and be fruitful and multiply. It's the whole point of 2 by 2. And so where you have the fish and the birds from Genesis chapter 1 being told to be fruitful and multiply, now you have the animals. So all of creation has essentially been told to be fruitful and multiply at various points within this story. And then most importantly, humans in both instances. And I would dare to say that it's that double meaning. Again, the humans, yes, earth, you need to procreate for the population of the earth, but also in terms of more so the royal priesthood, bring people into the kingdom, much like the Great Commission calling in our lives is really, again, this is my personal belief that the Great Commission is linked very much to that. And so again, this is just to recap where we've been, but the flood account being terms like, in its literary style it's written in, it's told as a decreation story, as a decreation narrative. So God created in Genesis 1, Genesis 2, and then because of the wickedness, both divine and humanity, he decreates and tries to start over with, quote unquote, a new Adam who will ultimately fail. Again, the one new Adam that came and passed the test was Jesus. But again, it goes back, you start seeing all this terminology that's been used in the previous 5 chapters, and it's written to explain the known flood account and to give credit to the one true God for what had happened. And it's also the story of God's judgment on the wicked world.